What can you do if you have an Arizona court order for legal decision making and parenting time for your children and you want to move to a different state? Or what if the other parent wants to move to a different state? Well, my name is Robert Larson. I'm an attorney with the Larson Law Office, and I'm also the owner of the Larson Law Office in Mesa, Arizona. And this is a question that comes up pretty frequently. And sometimes people talk to me because they want to move to a different state. Sometimes people come to me because the other parent wants to move to a different state. And so this is an issue that comes up frequently. And first of all, as far as you moving to a different state or the other parent, the court really doesn't have any jurisdiction to tell you where you can live. You're free to live anywhere you want. The question is whether you can move with your children. And so as long as you share decision making with the other parent, so there's some type of joint decision making order, or there's parenting time for both parents, then you have to either get consent of the other parent or a court order. And this is something that doesn't require like equal parenting time. It could be a situation where the children are with you 90% of the time and the other parent only has them 10% of the time. As long as they get them some amount of time, you would have to get their consent or a court order. So even if it were 99% and 1%, I believe that would still require either parent's consent or a court order. So as long as one of those two things are true, either joint decision making or the other parent has some decision making, you would have to get their permission. So if you have sole legal decision making authority and the other parent doesn't have any parenting time whatsoever, so they don't see the children at all, in reality, as well as the court order says they're not to have any time, then you don't really need permission to go to a different state because it doesn't really affect the other parent anyway. They're not involved in decision making, they're not seeing the children, so the law does not require you to get consent or a court order in that situation. But that's pretty rare. Most custody orders, decision making and parenting time orders, most of the time there's either some joint decision making involved or at least some parenting time for the other parent, even if it's supervised, even if it's extremely limited. So in that situation, you would need to get either consent or a court order. And also I want to mention another thing. I'm referencing moving to a different state because that's something that comes up a lot, but it's also moving to a different state or more than 100 miles. So sometimes this comes up where you could be moving from Phoenix to Tucson or Flagstaff to Phoenix, or, obviously there are a lot of different combinations. That would be more than 100 miles within the state of Arizona. But the same process applies whether it's more than 100 miles within Arizona or if it's to a different state. So as far as the process, you would look to Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS, section 25-408, to look up the procedures that you need to follow if you want to move out of state or more than 100 miles. And essentially what you have to do is you have to send a certified letter to the other parent saying, hey, I want to move out of state, and this is my notice to you, and the other person signs for it so you can prove that they received it. And then they have a certain amount of time that they can respond and object to it. And if they don't respond, if they don't object, then you're allowed to move. That's basically consent. So you could either get consent one of two ways. One is they actually say, yes, I agree. And if that's the situation, I would want to get that in writing. The other consent is basically kind of an implied consent where you go through the process to give them notice through the certified mail procedure, and they don't object, they don't respond. That's basically implied consent, and at that point you're allowed to move with the children because the other parent has agreed. If they don't agree, then you would have to file a petition with the court asking for the court to approve you moving with the children, and that's basically what's considered relocation. And the same statute, 25-408, lists all the things that the judge would have to consider if you end up having to go to a trial for a relocation case. And relocation cases very frequently end up in trial. It's very difficult to settle a case where you have parents wanting to live in two different states, especially if the children are in school. It's pretty much impossible to do a 50-50 parenting arrangement if you're living in different states or more than 100 miles and the children are in school. If they're not in school yet, it is theoretically possible, but even then that would be on a temporary basis until the kids get into school. And at one point they would have to live with one parent primarily, and the other one would primarily get the kids during school breaks and things like that. And if you have a situation where kids are homeschooled, then I guess maybe you could do a 50-50 arrangement, but that would be extremely rare. So generally, it's very difficult to compromise on these cases, and the judge can't really compromise either. A lot of times when you get into these type of disputes over parenting time, judges tend to kind of go in the middle. They don't usually give either parent exactly what they're looking for, and so they like to make things as equal as possible. But obviously, if people are living in different states, somebody has to be the primary residential parent and somebody else is going to be limited to school breaks. And so generally there's a winner and a loser in these cases, and that can make it pretty tough. As far as moving out of state, the law does favor keeping children where they are, because there's a presumption that seeing both parents on a regular basis is what's in their best interest. So obviously moving the children far away from one parent is going to create a problem with that presumption, where the law presumes that the children should see each parent regularly. So because of that, it's really, the burden is on the person wanting to move the children to prove that the move would be in their best interest. So in other words, you've got to prove that moving to a different state is so beneficial that it overcomes the detriment from not being able to see their other parent on a regular basis. And that's kind of difficult to do, but it's not impossible. I've seen it done. I've been on both sides of cases where judges have approved it. I've even had a case where a judge approved a move to a different country. So it can happen, but you have to have a lot of evidence, and you have to overcome the presumption that it's best for the kids to see both parents very frequently. And as far as what type of evidence might do that, certainly if one parent is not using the parenting time that they're authorized to have. So in other words, if you have a parent who's supposed to get the children, let's say every other weekend, but they hardly ever use that, that's something that could definitely be used against them. Because if they're not using the time that they're authorized to have the children, then what's the point of making the other parent stay in Arizona if the other parent's not even seeing the children? Domestic violence, child abuse, things like that, where the court could conclude that it's detrimental for the children to be with the other parent. That's obviously a factor. There's an infinite list of things that could be included, but those are some of the things that could make your case stronger for moving to a different state. Moving for a better job, especially if it's required to keep your employment, that could be a big factor as well. Being around family, that's helpful, but by itself, usually not going to be sufficient. So just because you grew up in Michigan and you want to go back home and be closer to your family, that by itself is probably not going to work. It's going to be unsuccessful most of the time. But if you have a number of factors in your favor, you're going to have a better chance. So anyway, that's the process. Typically, if you have a case and you're trying to move kids out of state, or if the other parent is trying to move them out of state, that's definitely a type of case you would want to have an attorney helping you out with, because there are specific factors that the judge has to consider and make findings about, and this is a pretty serious thing. I mean, when parents are trying to modify their parenting time orders, like I said, most of the time judges are going to compromise and not give the other parent everything they're looking for. So generally, you're not going to be in a situation where your worst case scenario is you get very little time with your children. But if the other party's trying to move out of state, that is the situation you're facing. And so you would want to have an attorney helping you out with that. And on the other hand, if you really believe it's in your children's best interest to move to a different state, like I said, it's an uphill battle and it's not impossible, but you would definitely want to have an attorney helping as well. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. If you agree, then please like the video below and subscribe so you can get more content like this. And I'll talk to you later.